the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Arlene Foster. I'm standing in for Michael Portillo while he takes a well-earned break. This morning, as we approach the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, what hope is there that power sharing will be restored in Northern Ireland? New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't have enough in the tank to continue. Do we expect too much from our leaders? And how does social media contribute to burnout? And he continues to live long and prosper. Star Trek actor George Takei on starring in a new musical based on his childhood, Twitter, and the secret to a long-lasting relationship. That's all to come, but first the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning, it's just past 11 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Labour's calling for an urgent investigation into claims the BBC chair helped Boris Johnson arrange a loan of up to £800,000 weeks before the then Prime Minister recommended him for the job. It follows a report in the Sunday Times that claims Tory donor Richard Sharp was involved in talks about financing Johnson when he found himself in financial difficulty in late 2020. Labour suggested it may have constituted a breach of the MP's Code of Conduct. A spokesperson for the former Prime Minister has dismissed the report as rubbish. Richard Sharp insists there was no conflict of interest. The Tory party chairman remains under increasing pressure after admitting he paid a penalty as part of a multi-million-pound tax settlement. Nadeem Zahawi says HMRC accepted he made a careless but not deliberate error in relation to the sale of shares in the polling company he founded. Labour's called his position untenable, but Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says he believes Nadeem Zahawi has paid his taxes.
He has been a very successful entrepreneur who built a business from nothing, employing hundreds of people, possibly even 1,000 or more people, and has successfully contributed to the British economy. And he paid tax, the business paid tax, his employees paid tax. And HMRC said that he was careless in the administration of his tax affairs, but he is now fully up to date with the taxes that he owes.
The Business Secretary says he'll name and shame the energy firms, forcing households to switch to prepayment meters. Grant Shapps has asked companies to stop moving households onto the expensive prepaid tariffs. He says they should instead focus on helping those struggling to pay their bills. The energy companies have also been asked by Mr Shapps to reveal the number of warrant applications they've made to enter properties. 9 people have died following a shooting during Chinese New Year celebrations in California. A warning: the following contains flashing images. Police and emergency services have been responding to the incident in Monterey Park near Los Angeles, where thousands of people had gathered for the New Year celebrations. European countries are putting renewed pressure on Germany to authorise the supply of its tanks to Ukraine. Several countries want to send their German-made Leopard tanks, but they need Germany to give them the green light. Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania say Germany, as a leading European power, has a special responsibility in restoring peace on the continent. Berlin insists it's not blocking deliveries and says it has yet to make a decision about supplying its tanks to Ukraine. US investigators have found more classified documents during a 12-hour search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some of them were found from Biden's time as a senator, others from his role as vice president to Barack Obama. A special counsel has been appointed to investigate how the president has handled sensitive documents. The Scottish Environment Minister says the use of dogs to hunt and kill wild animals has no place in modern Scotland. Maria McAllen's comments come ahead of next week's voting on the new Hunting with Dogs bill. Since 2002, it's been against the law to hunt a wild animal with a dog, with the new bill expected to close loopholes in the current laws. Buckingham Palace has revealed details for His Majesty's coronation weekend in May. Charles and Camilla will both be crowned at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May in a televised service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. A concert will then be held at Windsor Castle the following day. And the palace say global music icons will be the entertainment. Thousands of events are expected to take place across the UK with a bank holiday on Monday the 8th. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. But as now, it is back to Sunday with Arlene Foster.
Thanks very much, Aaron, for that news update. Well, this Easter, it will be 25 years since the Belfast Agreement. There are rumours that US President Joe Biden is planning to visit Northern Ireland to mark the occasion. However, the major issue that could keep the VIPs away is the division between the EU and the UK over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Just to remind viewers and listeners, the Northern Ireland Protocol was brought in by the EU and the UK to protect the single market of the EU and the Belfast Agreement. It certainly protected the EU single market by checking goods coming from GB into Northern Ireland with total disregard for the UK single market. But instead of protecting the Belfast Agreement, the Northern Ireland Protocol has brought down devolution in Northern Ireland and ruptured relations both north-south and east-west. Rishi Sunak has promised the US President that a deal will be reached with the EU by the time of the anniversary. And this week, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly met European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic. Political expectation about a resolution has grown. But is that the reality? I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. He's the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, and he joins me now to discuss the prospects of a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol and whether it will happen before the anniversary of the Belfast Agreement in April. Geoffrey, delighted that you could join me. Accepted wisdom seems to be that we're on a cusp of a deal. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that it is, Arlene, and good morning and greetings from your native Northern Ireland. I think that there's been a lot of talk about improvements in the mood music, but any of the conversations I've had with senior government ministers suggest that there's still quite a gap to close on some very significant issues related to the Northern Ireland Protocol before an agreement can be reached. So I'm not so sure that we're on the cusp of an agreement, but it could be that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, progress will be made on those major issues, but that remains to be seen.
So I was reading David Frost, who writes for The Telegraph, as you know, every Friday, and he was saying in this week's column that the government has paused the Northern Ireland Protocol bill in Parliament. There's no more talk of triggering Article 16. So they appear to have put all of their eggs into the basket of negotiation without leverage. Is that how you would see what's going on at the moment?
Well, I certainly think that the protocol bill gave the government significant leverage, as does, in fact, the approaching anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, as you pointed out, Good Friday 1998, 25 years on, and here we are. None of the political institutions established under that agreement are functioning properly, and that's down to the harm caused to the Northern Ireland economy and to political stability in Northern Ireland without a single unionist supporting the protocol elected to the Assembly in the elections last year in May. There is not a sustainable basis at the moment for the cross-community support required to re-establish, restore those political institutions. So the government has that leverage, but it is, I think, regrettable that they've been unable to proceed with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. And I've said to the Prime Minister that in the event that that agreement is not reached with the EU, then he needs to press on, and the government need to make good the commitments they have given to the people of Northern Ireland to resolve this issue.
It's funny you should mention those commitments, because I was reading somewhere today that the Conservative manifesto of the last election said that our laws will be made in London, Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and interpreted by judges across the UK, not in Luxembourg. It appears that the whole issue of oversight by the European Court of Justice has come back into the frame again. Do you think it would be acceptable to have the European Court of Justice looking at how laws are interpreted in Northern Ireland?
Well, of course, Arlene, it's not just a matter of who interprets those laws, it's a question of who makes those laws. And Northern Ireland is currently subject to EU law across a whole range of lawmaking here. That means that we are increasingly diverging from the rest of the United Kingdom on how we trade and on many other important issues. And all of that adds to the barriers to trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And as you rightly pointed out in your introduction, the protocol was supposedly designed to protect the integrity of the UK's internal market as well as the single market of the EU. Patently, it has failed, absolutely failed, to protect the UK's internal market. And that's why the UK government does need to introduce legislation to ensure that Northern Ireland businesses can trade freely within the United Kingdom, and that Northern Ireland consumers can receive goods sold by UK companies across all of the UK. So you're right, the ECJ is an issue. But fundamental to all of this is the question of who regulates the way that we trade within the United Kingdom. Who is responsible for making the laws that govern a wide range of issues of legislation? And we are very clear that when it comes to trade within the United Kingdom, it's the UK Parliament and government that should regulate how we trade. And then, of course, we're happy to look at how we protect the integrity of the EU single market with practical measures that don't breach the integrity of the United Kingdom.
Finally, Sir Geoffrey, I'm going to be talking later on about burnout and pressure on our politicians and leaders. Do you feel a sense of pressure at this point in time on you?
Well, of course, Arlene, you've been in my shoes, and you know, in leadership, pressure is always there. But I am very clear that we need to get this right. And therefore, I would say to the UK government and to the Prime Minister, don't go for a half-baked deal. Don't go for some kind of interim arrangement. Let's get this done, and done properly. Because if we're to restore the political institutions in Northern Ireland, if we're to be able to move Northern Ireland forward with cross-community support, then we need an agreement that unionists as well as nationalists can support. And that means dealing with the very difficult and challenging issues. But that's what leadership is about. So I think the pressure is on the UK government to get a deal done, but I want to see them get the right deal for Northern Ireland and for the whole of the UK.
Sir Geoffrey, thanks so much for joining us this morning and giving us your time. Well, I'm joined in the studio, I'm delighted to say, by Professor Tom Hennessy, who is in Canterbury University. Thomas, you have taken a long-term interest in what happens in Ireland in general, Northern Ireland, British-Irish relations. We're coming up to the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement. What is your assessment of where we are at present?
Thank you. Hi. I think it's very difficult, but a lot of issues relating to what we deal with now in controversy in Northern Ireland, between Britain and Ireland and Northern Ireland. are left over from the Good Friday Agreement, because the Good Friday Agreement was, if you can recall, astronomically difficult to reach agreement on the issues that power sharing and cross-border bodies and everything like that.
To get there.
It took years. I mean, that was the conversation for years, for decades even beforehand, and you had the Sunnydale Agreement in 1973. So when we reached that agreement, not to the satisfaction of everyone, these other issues suddenly emerge, and that's one thing about that one learns about a peace process, that there are other subsidiary issues that have to be addressed, and these issues take years to actually address and produce solutions to. And indeed, with things such as dealing with the past and how you deal with killings in Northern Ireland and the roles of paramilitaries and state forces and everything like that, we know that the last real first attempt to get a report on that was in 2010, and we're still now in 2023. So we're still trying.
So when the Belfast Agreement, which was meant to be a comprehensive agreement between the parties in Northern Ireland and the government of the United Kingdom and indeed the government of the Republic of Ireland came about, there was a hole, from my perspective, insofar as it didn't deal with victims, innocent victims who had lost loved ones, who had suffered as a result of the violence in Northern Ireland. And now, 25 years later, we're still dealing with those issues. And there's a legacy bill, as you know, going through the House of Commons, now in the House of Lords again. One of the issues that a lot of people feel very strongly about is that there's an attempt to rewrite what happened in Northern Ireland. Now, as a professional historian, do you believe it's important to have an accurate view, a factual view of what went on during those years, which we euphemistically call the Troubles?
Yeah, well, we have a divided society and a contested past. So how do we get an accurate view of what happened, or an approximation of what happened? Now, at the minute, there's what's on the table is something going back that looks at oral history and so forth. But oral history on its own is not enough, because you are dealing with how people remember things, people misremember things that happened, and interpretations, and there are certain narratives that are dominant in both communities, and unionist and nationalist communities, that tell that not necessarily accurate. So I believe you need to look at the archival evidence. You need to be part of that. You need to understand that, and you can have that doesn't exclude oral history and people's memories and so forth, but you have a holistic view, a holistic approach to looking at the past, because lots of things in these archives are recorded at the time, say 1972 or something like that, and that's how people saw it at the time. So you have that, and together we can get a holistic view. We won't get an agreed view, but we can have a multi-narrative view, a multi-view of what happened in the past, and perhaps understand, so not to repeat those sorts of things again.
So when I was studying A-level history, one of the things my teacher always taught me to do was to go to the primary source and what you're essentially saying is we need to look not from our memory of what happened, not from the victims' memories or the perpetrator's memories of what happened, but actually to look at what the reporting was at that particular point in time.
Yes, and it's also what historians do by looking at archives, is the context. And that's vital, because the context of the time is different to what we attribute to assessing a situation now. So you have to understand what was happening at the time and the pressures on the individuals occurring at the time and the decisions they made, and also the consequences of those decisions. So it's about, I'd say, understanding a collective responsibility, but that's different from a collective guilt and blaming people and individuals and so on. It's understanding what was going on at the time.
So finally, Professor Hennessy, I mean, there's all this talk about oral evidence. There's a lot of talk about rewriting the past. Of course, it's not a phrase that you would use as a professional historian. Do you think there is a need for there to be a historical fact-finding evidence of what happened during the Northern Ireland Troubles, to give that balance when people look back at those 40 years?
I think it's essential. It's essential to know how the pressures that were operating on individuals and organisations at that time.
Thomas Hennessy, thanks so much for coming in. That's Professor Hennessy. He is a Professor of British and Irish History at Canterbury Christ Church University, and I'm very pleased that he was able to join me, as well as Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Coming up, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't have anything left in the tank and is going to step down. How common is burnout in our leaders?
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Well, next month, the Online Safety Bill continues its passage to becoming law with a second reading in the House of Lords. It only made it thus far because of further concessions by the government to make social media senior executives liable for harmful content demanded by Tory rebels. The amendment making tech chiefs criminally liable if they don't block children from seeing damaging content has been criticised as too broad and too difficult to prosecute. The 50 rebels show the divisions within the party, especially amongst those who don't think the bill goes far enough.
So there is concern about the fact that they appear to be weakening that bill, but we certainly do need
a form of online safety bill to protect people. We've seen people be driven into the most tragic of circumstances because of content that they've been able to find online. And I'm a parent, I've got 2 girls, an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. I mean, it actually terrifies me to think that they might be able to find horrible material, particularly at stages in their life when they are vulnerable, because we all know adolescence is a vulnerable time.
One criticism of the bill has always been that it's far too wide-ranging and therefore will protect no one. Molly Kingsley is from the campaign group Us For Them, and she joins me now. Making the social media bosses criminally liable, that has to be a good thing, isn't it?
I mean, this is a minefield, isn't it? So I think the first thing to say is, absolutely supportive of what these Rebel MPs are trying to do, because I think there's a real risk that without this amendment, not only are you going to have concerns from a free speech point of view with the online safety bill, but it's not going to do what it needs to do on a child safety front. And, obviously I come at this from a point of view both of a children's campaigner, but actually also of a campaign group that, knows only too well how important free speech is and how readily wide powers can be abused, taking away the right of organisations and individuals to free speech. I mean, we experienced that ourselves when we were, deplatformed effectively by PayPal. So I think, given you have this conflict, you have to look at where we are and actually what is the pressing need. And there is no doubt that children are being harmed now because of their exposure to social media and smartphones. So I'm very supportive of what the MPs are doing. I think the criminal liability is a step in the right direction. I do think, though, as a society, we need to ask ourselves, is it enough? Is there more we should be doing? And I think our view on this is actually we need to step back and think, let's look at the hardware, let's look at smartphones, and let's ask whether this ubiquitous smartphone use that sees, 91% of 11-year-olds now own a smartphone. What are we doing? Because whilst they have a smartphone, we can try and regulate content all we want, but the reality is children will always be exposed to some harmful material.
It's amazing that you mentioned that, Molly. I find that mind-boggling that 91% of 11-year-olds have access to a smartphone or have a smartphone. Where does parental responsibility come into all of this? Because, of course, we need to have the legislation in place to give us the boundaries in terms of child safety, child security, and then on the other side, freedom of speech. But surely parental responsibility has to come into the frame as well.
Yeah, I mean, Arlene, that's a question we get asked all the time, and I totally take that on board. And I think, our instincts my instincts as an individual, and also I think Us For Them's instincts as a campaign group are towards the, libertarian, everyone has a responsibility side, and sort of slightly dubious about state intervention. I will say, though, that there are many areas in life where actually, as a society, we look to the state to help us. So, driving is a good example with this. I think we've got to a point with smartphones where it would be a little bit like saying, teach your children to cross the road. They're all responsible parents. You're responsible for making sure your children don't get killed on the road. But by the way, we don't have any road safety laws. We don't have any speed limits. We don't have any expectation about how adults can act. And I think we are in that kind of wild, wild west now with digital technology where we haven't laid down the right rules of engagement. So actually, whilst acknowledging that the onus is on parents to curb and control their smartphone use, the reality is that is almost impossible given where we have got to with smartphones, where all children have them, where they're bullied sometimes if they don't get on social media, and where schools are now requiring, in some cases, kids to have them. We are doing things very wrong as a society, and I think we need to look at our attitude to, rolling back smartphone use with intervention where needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a framework, you're talking about the rules of engagement, and I entirely understand that. I just came across my explanatory notes for the online safety bill today. It's a huge piece of legislation. Do you think that it's going to be able to deal with this very real and pressing worry that parents have about the safety of their children?
I think we need a different approach, if I'm honest. So we launched a campaign actually just before Christmas. It's a shameless plug here. It's www.safescreens.org. And what it calls for is effectively tobacco-style regulation of smartphones for kids. Now, lots of people would draw their breath at that. Say, oh, more government regulation. We don't want that. I think you're going to have to, at some point, tackle the hardware, and you're going to have to tackle the sale of this product, which I think many parents would say, because of its inherently addictive qualities, is a dangerous product in the hands of children. I think you're going to have to tackle that at point of sale. The problem and the worry with the online safety bill, and again, I think if we have the online safety bill, it absolutely must include the criminal liability for senior managers point. I think experience shows that these criminal liability provisions can be hard to enforce. So I think whilst that is necessary, it is unlikely to be enough. And we should see what, Miriam and Bill Cash have done, very much the start of an overhaul of our thinking of attitudes towards social media, but also smartphones and children.
Yeah. So there's much more work to be done in relation to all of that and around education, which you've already referenced for our young people and indeed for our parents. But are you just finally, Molly, content that a lot of the regulation, a lot of the oversight from this online safety bill has been left with Ofcom? Do you think it's the appropriate body that should be looking after the regulation of this bill?
I mean, again, it's difficult, isn't it? Because what you have here, and, I should say, actually, I used to be a senior lawyer, so looking at it with a kind of legal hat on, like you, I mean, you showed us your notes. They're huge. The bill is 200 pages long. It is incredibly complex. As a lawyer, if I'm honest, was struggling to follow it. And you think, how is this going to be interpreted in practice? And how is Ofcom going to do what it's meant to do? So under the bill, Ofcom has this very beefed up role. Now, for it to do that, particularly, I understand the latest on the criminal liability point is that Ofcom is now going to be reinserted into that process. So actually, before criminal proceedings can be brought, Ofcom will have effectively had to have recommended that. Now, that sounds fine in principle, and it may well work, but it will certainly require on Ofcom having very wide enforcement powers. Now, that will not come without risk from a free speech point of view, and also just resources. So if we're talking about this and we're talking about it having real teeth, Ofcom needs to be resourced and staffed and funded much more like a regulator, like the SEC maybe in the States for securities regulation. And I think there's a real question as to whether that's a good thing and whether the political will to ensure the adequate resourcing is there, even if we think it is.
Molly, thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll be having further conversations because this bill is still going through Parliament, and it's around the safety of our children that we're most concerned. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, we're going to move on now, and it'll be a 3-day affair and is expected to drive a wave of tourism to the UK. Official details of King Charles's coronation have been released, with a royal procession, a balcony appearance and a coronation concert featuring global talent to form part of the celebrations. The coronation itself is expected to be watched by tens of millions of people around the world. GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker joins me now so that we can discuss all of this. Well, Cameron, the details are out. They came out late last night, isn't that right?
It was, yeah. 10:30 last night we got the details, featuring a 3-day extravaganza of celebrations of His Majesty King Charles III and Queen Camilla, the Queen Consort, of course. So we've got the main events, of course, the coronation at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May. The King and Queen Consorts will be crowned together. They will travel from Buckingham Palace in what's known as the King's Procession to Westminster Abbey, of course, a 900-year-old service. Now, Buckingham Palace describes it as an event that's going to reflect perhaps modern Britain and looking towards the future, but at the same time maintaining that pageantry, that pomp, that tradition, which we're so used to from seeing, old newsreels of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation and so on.
Because there was some suggestions, weren't there, that it was going to be pared back. And
Yeah.
I was aghast at that. Being a royalist, I wanted to see the pomp and the circumstances, but it appears that that's all going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, so there were initial reports that it was going to be cut down considerably due to costings.
Yes.
Now, King Charles III is very much aware of the cost of living crisis affecting Great Britain. From my understanding, in terms of being scaled back, it's more taking out the stuff which is seen as too outdated, trying to bring the timing down, because Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in '53 lasted for 3 hours. We're not expecting it to last quite as long. So any costs which will be cut, they will be, but it's not going to impact, as far as I'm aware, the tradition, the crowning, the anointing with the holy oil, those kind of sacred religious elements are still very much going to be there. And we're getting a big coronation procession back to Buckingham Palace afterwards. That golden state coach, which Queen Elizabeth II used in *53, widely expected to be used again to take the King and Queen consorts back. Thousands, of course, will come to London, the tourism, cheering crowds to cheer the King and Queen consorts. They will appear on the balcony with other members of the royal family. Now, we don't know which members of the royal family are going to be appearing on the balcony. There are question marks over Prince Andrew, Harry and Meghan as well, of course.
Surely they won't come.
I don't believe so. The reason being, working members of the royal family during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee did not appeared on the balcony, but other members did not. So I think it will perhaps happen. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, but I would guess that's what's going to happen. Then we've got this big coronation lunch, which is going to happen, street parties, bringing communities together across the nation, a big concert at Windsor Castle with A-list celebrity guests and community choirs from across the kingdom and the Commonwealth as well, and a big volunteering initiative involving the Royal Voluntary Service, the Scouts, so a whole weekend really of celebration.
And Cameron, you'll be there covering it for us.
We will be, indeed, at Westminster Abbey and at Buckingham Palace.
Super. Thanks so much, Cameron, for joining us. Thank you. Well, no one was expecting the announcement. At a news conference this week, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, said she hadn't enough in the tank and was going to resign. Taking office at just 37 to become the world's youngest female leader, in just under 6 years, she has had to deal with huge crises, including the pandemic, the Christchurch terror attacks and the White Island volcano eruption. But plagued by low approval ratings and criticism over the handling of COVID, she says it's been all too much.
The only interesting angle that you will find is that after going on 6 years of some big challenges, I am human. Politicians are human. We give all that we can for as long as we can, and then it's time. And for me, it's time. I know what this job takes, and I know that I no longer have enough in the tank to do it justice. It's that simple.
Is this a prime example of workplace burnout? Is political life in the public eye just too demanding to be sustainable? Well, I'm joined now by Professor Sir Carrie Cooper, Professor of Organisational Psychology and Health at the University of Manchester, and psychologist and podcaster Dr. Tara Quinn Carrillo. And they both join me now to discuss this topic because I think it is an important topic to have a conversation about. Dr. Tara Quinn Carrillo, I'm going to start with you. How do you identify burnout in someone who's such a high-profile politician?
One of the first things is it is quite difficult to notice, which is why people tend to reach burnout before they realise that they have it. So it's very different from something that we call overwhelm. It tends to be what we call hitting a wall, which is not a clinical word, but it's useful for the public to think about. It's about having nothing left, physical energy being drained, emotional energy, waking up unable to face the day, having difficulty making decisions, but also a sense of what we call depersonalisation, where actually sometimes you feel a little bit as if you're watching yourself living your life. You're no longer engaged or perhaps engaging in valued things anymore.
And Dr. Cooper, it's not just about burnout, is it? It's about the fact that no doubt she was exhausted, and I think we can see that from looking at video and indeed still photographs of her in the past and then most recently. She's no doubt exhausted, but she was also obviously looking at the polls and thinking, have I got enough energy to fight an election where I'm behind in the polls?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was actually really useful in the wider society that somebody, a senior person, has said, you know what, I'm not able to cope anymore. I don't think it was political. She could have used any number of other excuses other than a highly personal explanation and saying, hey, listen, the tank's not full. I'm through. I'm tired. I'm exhausted from this role. And there are lots of people. Remember, Arlene, we have roughly 57% of all long-term sickness absence in the UK and many other developed countries is for stress, anxiety, and depression. Burnout is only one form of that. And so we have a problem for a lot of working people in the UK, not just senior people. And for a senior person to admit, I wish we had more politicians in the UK who would open up. I don't know if you remember, about 15, 17 years ago, the Prime Minister of Norway went on national television and said, I've been suffering depression. This job is really very, very tough. It's getting to me. I'm taking some time out. He took time out. He then was reelected in the next election. I think there are politicians we have and senior people in business who, when the time is right, when the tank is no longer full, should admit it. We're not getting honesty from our leaders. And unless they open up, like, by the way, the chief exec of a major UK bank did, Lloyds Bank, when he admitted he was suffering depression and took time out, and then he came back and was very, very successful. We just need our senior people to say, hey, that's it. The time's up. It's taken a lot out of me, particularly if you're in a senior role. Politicians, business leaders, in all walks of life, because it does have an impact. These very senior jobs do have an impact on your life. But by opening up, it enables other people further down the food chain to open up about issues they have and how they could cope.
I thought it was very telling, excuse me, coughing here, from Dr. Tara, that she said, I am human, politicians are human. It's quite something that a senior politician has to say, politicians are human, isn't it?
Absolutely, just reminding us that there is a person behind the job that we do. So when we think of burnout is in relation to work and demands. And I think actually, just as we were saying before, it's really important that people start to talk about this more and more. And off the back of the pandemic, there's a lot of research coming out now saying that rates of burnout are on the rise. So many of us have had to redefine our lives overnight. Work demands have increased, but there can be this misconception that, working at home is easy, for example, but also coming back to your point just then, that people that are in positions of power, people that we see on our television screen, politicians, that actually we can forget there's a person behind there and a person that needs to function in a healthy way.
And I'm going to talk about social media in just a minute, Tara, but I read an interesting article over the weekend which was basically making the point that why are we pretending that our female leaders are exactly the same as our male leaders? And actually, they have often different priorities. Their lives are different. Why are we pretending they're the same? Do you think being a female leader was part of her stepping away, or do you think this could easily have happened to be a male?
I think what psychologists do, we need to formulate. So we can't speak for her individual situation unless she shares that with us. And psychologists, we're very careful not to just go on what we read in the media. But from the research, which is what we're going to go back to, we do know that women can be, in certain situations, more likely than men. And that is, if they are raising families, for example, and do have a proportion of the childcare as well as their job, we do have to factor those things in. But we need to also be very cautious in terms of when we're looking at a Prime Minister facing burnout, what those individual factors are, but also considering what might be there in terms of sex.
And Professor Cooper, do you have a view on that? Because not only was she a female leader, she was quite a young leader when she came to the job. She was only 37.
No, I think Tara's right. What you find with women leaders is that they have the double shift. Women in general who are working have the double shift. They have the job, usually in a male-dominated world, as well as the role at home, because they still are the primary carers at home. Hey, listen, what we need is a new man. I think the new man is currently touring Scotland, and he's in Aberdeen at the moment. We don't have enough men who will support women at home who are pursuing a career and help them with the domestic chores. That is a real problem for working women generally. So we need to sort that out. But I don't think it's the fact that she was necessarily a woman, other than the fact, because I think this will happen with men, other than women are much more honest, have more EQ, emotional intelligence, and are prepared to open up. Just men, there may be men currently in the current UK government, I'm sure there are, who are suffering burnout themselves. And if they're not, they should be. And will we get them to admit it? In a million years, you won't get them to admit it.
Yeah,
but she was prepared to admit it. And that's because she's a woman, much more able to talk about her feelings than you get most men.
Yeah, and obviously I would say this, wouldn't I? But women are more empathetic to how their feelings reflect on what they're doing. We have some stills, I think, of Barack Obama when he went into office and when he left office. And likewise, I think we have one of Tony Blair as well, just to prove the point that it's not just females that feel the weight of leadership. There's the Blair montage now. I just wanted to briefly, and finally with both of you, perhaps coming to you first, Tara, to mention the role of social media and the pressure that brings on female leaders in politics, but also in business and throughout society. This, you know, everybody wants to look perfect. They want to appear that they can do it all. That extra pressure that comes on our leaders nowadays rather than when Margaret Thatcher was around.
Absolutely. I mean, look at us now. So on the basis of what we're reading, what we're digesting, whether it's on social media, through newspapers, we're talking about people in senior positions in politics, aren't we? So you're under the spotlight. The more famous you are, the more notoriety you are, presumably the more coverage you get. That's the kind of way it goes. And people have opinions. And if we come down the ladder just a little bit for everyday people managing in their jobs, managing their businesses, we're faced with these images of how we can have it all at times. You can manage your business, you can have a career, you can be a parent. You can do all these other things, give back to the community. But what we're not then addressing is how much people, as Jacinth said, how much have we got in the tank to be able to do all those things and look after our health as well?
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I could talk about this subject for quite a while myself, but thanks go to Professor Carrie Cooper and Dr. Tara Quinn-Carrillo. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Well, coming up, making a musical out of misery, how Star Trek's George Takei is getting rave reviews in a show based on his childhood experiences. That's after the break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Well, he's boldly going where he has not gone before to tread the boards of the West End stage. The childhood of George Takei, perhaps best known for playing Lieutenant Sulu in Star Trek, has inspired a musical about Japanese Americans being interned in the United States during the Second World War, called Allegiance. Now 85, George plays the dual role of the show's fiercely patriotic protagonist, Sam Kimura, as well as Sam's ailing grandfather. Arts editor of Express Online, Stefan Karazis, caught up with him pre-show and began by asking him what the show was based on.
Well, on December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. It was a devastating bombing which threw the entire United States into war hysteria and racism. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and there were Americans who happened to look just like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. I was 5 years old at the time, and I really didn't understand what was going on until that terrifying morning when my father came into the bedroom that I shared with Henry, my brother. He dressed us hurriedly and told us to play in the living room while he and my mother did some last-minute packing. And suddenly, we saw two soldiers marching up our driveway, carrying rifles with shiny bayonets on them. Henry and I were frozen with terror. My father came out, answered it, and at gunpoint, at bayonet point, they told him to get your family out of here. That was my introduction to this life-changing experience.
And they took all the Japanese Americans who were American citizens.
We were
absolutely American citizens, born and raised.
We had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor.
And you were taken to camps. Your homes, your livelihoods, everything. So much was lost. You came out of those camps with very, very little. And it's a story that hasn't really been told.
And there were no charges, no trial. In the most undemocratic way, we were simply rounded up by executive order signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and put into 10 barbed wire prison camps in the most desolate, God-forsaken places. So they took our money, destroyed my father's business, took our home because we didn't pay the mortgage, and imprisoned us. It was the most un-American, to use an overused word, that the government was perpetrating on us. And that is the dramatic crux of our story, how divisive the government's behavior was on not only the Japanese American community, but how individual families were fractured. And we turned this dark chapter of American history into a musical where we have production numbers, singing and dancing, high kicking, because that too is organic to this story. Every classic musical has a great story. Les Miserables is about the French Revolution. West Side Story is about gang warfare in Manhattan. So we are about this dark period in American history when innocent American citizens who happen to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor are imprisoned and tortured and subjected to the most excruciating punishment when they are absolutely innocent of any charge.
You're obviously very active on social media, but I was also loving the fact that in the show we have a Japanese American marrying a very white, or falling in love with a very white nurse. Your own story is a wonderful parallel for that, and I love the fact that you tweeted famously that, you know, when I was growing up, we weren't allowed to marry white girls, and now, what did you do?
I married a white man. And that was another campaign of mine, because we are entitled as individual human beings to the same kind of stability and happiness, access to happiness and joy in our relationships, despite the difference in our orientation.
And how long have you two been together?
37 years now.
What is the secret to that?
Well, I'm lovable.
Of course.
The worst, I'm very argumentative.
You have some opinions about things?
I do indeed.
And the secret to any type of long relationship, because it's all the same at the end, what's the secret?
You know, it's acceptance of our complexity, understanding that we are human beings and we have our idiosyncrasy.
You're a handsome man of 60. How old are we now?
I'm 85,
there
pushing
we go.
86.
Pushing 86 this year. Hugely active, and you know, to steal a phrase. How does one live long and prosper at 86?
I exercise regularly, eat properly, never smoke. Brad and I are both were runners. Brad had done 2 or 3 marathons. I'd never done a marathon. And I asked him to train me for my first marathon, and that's how our relationship began. I finished that marathon, and now we've been doing the marathon of life together.
You're very active on social media, which, you know, things people my age or older, you know, we find a minefield and complicated, and you are absolutely out there, and you're building this huge following because people trust you. You have something to say, and how important is this to you, your platform and what you talk about?
This is what my whole life has been about. It was the failure of our ideals, and we have to be engaged in our democratic process.
Is there a line on freedom of speech? Is there a line on what's acceptable?
I believe in freedom of speech, but freedom involves responsibility, taking the consequences of what you say and do. But in social media, there's anonymity, and there's no responsibility because of the anonymity. And people can say the meanest thing, the cruelest thing, the most grotesque thing to sensitive people, teenage girls, and they're devastated. That is the problem with social media. No one takes responsibility. That is the crux of the problem.
And I would say respect, possibly, and telling the truth also would be nice.
Absolutely. Respecting yourself so that you respect others. That doesn't exist. It's the Wild West with masks on. People, unknown people, and anonymous people saying vicious, cruel things, lies, and not being responsible at all.
There's a lot of backwards and forwards between you and William Shatner, which is entertaining, to say the least. And you've did the two. I just wonder, because you must see each other all the time at conferences and things like that. Do we
conferences? That makes it dignified. We call them conventions.
Conventions. Do we just walk past and do a little Star Trek?
We say hi.
Sybil.
As we pass each other in the corridor.
I just want to say thank you so much for welcoming me onto your stage. Welcome from us to you to London.
Well, thank you very much.
And thank you for sharing some of your story with us. And we look forward to seeing where this goes next.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to George for taking time out of his insane schedule, 6 shows a week, and he's nearly 86. Coming up with yet another scandal at the Met Police. Can we trust the people who are supposed to be keeping us safe? That's after the weather.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest weather update courtesy of the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vautry. We've got a fairly foggy start for some of us out there today. There is freezing fog around across southeastern areas of England underneath this high pressure system. But further towards the northwest, we've got frontal systems trying to push their way in, and that's providing fairly extensive low cloud and hill fog. This is coming with a band of patchy outbreaks of rain and drizzle, mainly affecting southwest Scotland into Northern Ireland and other Irish Sea coastal areas. We could see some brighter spells eventually developing for the Northern Isles, where the winds will eventually ease out later on in the day as well. But the best of the sunshine once the freezing fog does clear across the southeast. However, cold air in place here, temperatures only really getting to 3 or 4 degrees. It will be mildest underneath that cloud, and it's going to stay mildest overnight as well, where we see that cloud pretty much persisting across northern western areas. Meanwhile, further to the south and east, a sharp frost developing tonight down to as low as -8 Celsius in some rural prone locations. Certainly some ice scrapers may be needed as you head out first thing this morning, and we could see the return of, again, some freezing fog patches. So you do head out for work on Monday morning, do just take care for any dense patches here. They will eventually clear off to allow some brighter spells, but we could just see a bit of ingress of the cloud across southeastern areas of England. Meanwhile, that cloud in the northwest is pretty much staying put, so it is likely to be another fairly grey and drab day. The contrast in temperatures continues, though, staying mild in the northwest, highs around 10 degrees Celsius in some coastal locations, but still fairly cold in the southeast, and it's going to return to be a fairly cold night once again as the frost redevelops into the evening. As we move on into the rest of the week, that cloud in the northwest is slowly going to sink its way southwards, and that will also bring the milder air further towards southern areas of England as well. Enjoy your day.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament.
But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Arlene Foster. I'm sitting in for Michael Portillo, and Michael will be back again next week. An astonishing 800 officers in the Metropolitan Police are currently under investigation for allegations of sexual offences and serious sexual abuse. And that's after PC David Carrick was formally dismissed from the police after he admitted 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. Have we lost trust in the police? And is the policing by consent model broken? It was the nurses this week. Next week, it's the ambulance drivers. And in a couple of weeks' time, what amounts to a national day of action is planned. How can we resolve the endless strikes? And on a lighter note, a celebration of Scotland. Burns Night approaches, and never one to skip a party. Michael Portillo samples the delights of haggis, tatties and neeps, washed down, of course, with whiskey. That's all coming up after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
At least 10 people have died following a shooting during Chinese New Year celebrations in California. A warning: the following contains flashing images. Emergency services have been responding to an incident in Monterey Park near Los Angeles where thousands of people had gathered. Another 10 people have been taken to local hospital to be treated for injuries, at least one of whom is in a critical condition. Police have confirmed the suspect is male, but it is not clear if he remains at large. Labour's calling for an urgent investigation into claims the chairman of the BBC helped Boris Johnson arrange a loan of up to £800,000 weeks before the then Prime Minister recommended him for the job. The calls come as the former Prime Minister has been in Ukraine this morning as part of the country's Unity Day. Now, Labour's claim follows a report in the Sunday Times that says Tory donor Richard Sharp was involved in talks about financing Johnson's Downing Street lifestyle in late 2020. A spokesperson for the former Prime Minister has dismissed the report as rubbish. Richard Sharp insists there was no conflict of interest. Meanwhile, a cabinet minister has told GB News Nadhim Zahawi has the Prime Minister's support following allegations about his tax affairs. The embattled Tory party chairman is under increasing political pressure after revealing he made a careless but not deliberate error over a multi-million-pound share sale in the polling company he founded. Now, the former Chancellor didn't disclose the size of the settlement with HMRC or confirm if he paid a fine. Labour's called his position untenable, but Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says he believes Mr Zahawi has paid his taxes.
I don't know any more details than what he has already put in the public domain. I don't think it would be right or proper for me to speculate or guess about any further details about his tax affairs. But he has been a successful entrepreneur, building a company which has paid tax, employing people who have paid taxes, and he has himself paid tax, a considerable amount, because he's been successful.
The Business Secretary says he will name and shame energy firms forcing households to switch to prepayment meters. Grant Shapps has asked companies to stop moving households onto more expensive prepaid tariffs. He says they should instead focus on helping those struggling to pay their bills. Energy companies, they've also been asked by Mr Shapps to reveal the number of warrant applications they've made to enter properties. European countries are putting renewed pressure on Germany to authorise the supply of its tanks to Ukraine. Several countries want to send their German-made Leopard tanks, but they need Germany to give it the green light. Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania say Germany, as a leading European power, has a special responsibility in restoring peace on the continent. Berlin, though, insists it's not blocking deliveries and has yet to make a decision about supplying its tanks to Ukraine. US investigators have found more classified documents during a 12-hour-long search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some of them were from Biden's time as a senator, others from when he was vice president to Barack Obama. A special counsel has been appointed to investigate how the president has handled his sensitive documents. At least 300 migrants have arrived in the UK on 8 small boats overnight, making it the busiest day of channel crossings so far this year. GB News understands a few other boats have also set off this morning, but have not yet made it to the UK. And the boats were being monitored by French naval vessels, which could only intervene if the migrants got into difficulties. Today's arrivals bring the total number of those crossing the channels this year to 450. The Scottish Environment Minister says the use of dogs to hunt and kill wild animals has no place in modern Scotland. Mary McCallan's comments come ahead of next week's vote on the new Hunting with Dogs bill. Since 2002, it's been against the law to hunt a wild animal with a dog, with the new bill expected to close loopholes in the current laws. And Buckingham Palace has revealed details for His Majesty's coronation in May. Charles and Camilla will both be crowned at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May in a televised service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. A concert will then be held at Windsor Castle the day after that, featuring what the palace have called global music icons. Thousands of events are expected to take place across the UK, with the bank holiday declared for Monday the 8th. That's it. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Sunday with Arlene Foster.
Thanks again to Aaron. So when Sir Robert Peel set up the Metropolitan Police in 1829, its 9 founding principles were built on the idea of policing by consent. In short, the legitimacy of the police force comes from the approval and cooperation of the public. But these are dark days for the Metropolitan Police and indeed for policing in general. This week, PC David Carrick was dismissed from the force after admitting to dozens of charges, including 24 counts of rape, over an 18-year period. It's the latest in a list of scandals tarnishing the police's reputation. Home Secretary Suella Braverman is warning more could be on the way. In fact, currently 800 officers are currently being investigated for over 1,000 allegations of domestic abuse and sexual offences. With trust declining, is the future of policing by consent under threat? And how can trust in the police be rebuilt? Well, I'm joined in the studio by Shabnan Chowdhury, a former detective superintendent in the Metropolitan Police, and Harriet Wistrich, founder and director of the Centre for Women's Justice. Thank you both for joining me to discuss what is a very troubling week for the Metropolitan Police. But Harriet, if I can go to you first, we felt that we had reached a really low point in trust for the police with the Wayne Couzens conviction. But here we are again with 24 rape convictions. My goodness, this is a real low point for the Metropolitan Police.
Yes, it's really extraordinary. It's sort of worse and worse, keeps coming up. From our point of view, we're an organisation that works specifically around violence against women and the state. We have been looking at the issue of police perpetrated abuse for about 3 years. We launched something called a police super complaint when we'd been contacted by a number of women who had reported about the difficulties they had in reporting this violence or abuse by police officers that they were in relationships with. And as a consequence of looking at those cases, we decided there were systemic issues in policing, and that's why we issued something called a police super complaint. Since we publicised that, and that was back in March 2020, before Wayne Couzens, we've been contacted by nearly 200 women who have reported issues, similar sorts of issues, and so the stories that we've heard around Couzens and also more recently Carrick, although extreme, are not that surprising given what we've seen about the complete failure of policing to address these really serious allegations of criminality by police officers.
And Shabnan, you were a former senior police officer yourself. It's the use of the warrant card I thought was completely chilling. To use your warrant card to gain sexual advantage is just incredible, isn't it?
I don't think police officers realise until they actually join policing how powerful a role and position they have in society. That warrant card is a golden nugget to them, but actually what it is, it's a warrant card that is there to protect the public, to uphold the law, not to abuse your warrant card for your own personal position, and to actually abuse and violate women and girls and then threaten them that nobody will care or listen to them.
And I mean, the impact this has on good police officers, on police officers who serve with integrity is huge, isn't it?
Well, the impact is huge. Unfortunately, we are hearing more and more of some of the rotten apples within policing. And we're not just talking about the despicable murder of Sarah Everard and the current situation that occurred this week has come to light. Remember Nina Smallman, Bieber Henry, remember the Charing Cross WhatsApp groups. It does tarnish policing. I, as a former police officer, would be ashamed to be a police officer. And there are many, many good police officers within policing. But it's now up to them to start calling out the rotten apples and actually identifying the red flag behaviours so that the public and colleagues within policing can also be protected.
And Harriet, the Metropolitan Police Chief has brought out a new turnaround plan. The plan's mantra, we understand, is more trust, less crime, high standards. We'd all love that, but I think this is a really fundamental issue now. It is about policing with consent, isn't it? And it's about how we rebuild that model that was set up all those years ago by Peel.
Yes, I mean, it really is an idea of policing that we're at the moment, and it's very hard to see what will ever restore trust in policing, given where we've arrived at this particular point. There have been reports after reports after reports about incidents and problems in policing and promises for reform, and yet we just seem to be getting worse and worse, and the stories keep coming out. So it's hard to know. We in our super complaint report made a series of recommendations, which actually, frankly, I'm not quite sure go far enough. But they involved issues around bespoke reporting, so that women would feel confident to come forward to report, because that was clearly an issue that we saw. We need much better protection for whistleblowers, and we need to encourage officers to report on fellow officers about the where they see these sorts of issues. I mean, one wonders what on earth was going on in some of these units. Not just that certain officers were able to thrive in the way that and continued to abuse in the way they were, but what were their colleagues thinking? They must have known, they must have seen. I mean, we know, for example, that that Carrick was known as the bastard, and we know that Cousins was known as the rapist. And how can that kind of reputation exist at all? And no one, and their managers, who are their managers and what are they doing about it? Those officers and those bystanders also need to be questioned and held accountable.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the length of time over which this was taking place, Harriet, when I read about it this week, frankly. But we're talking about encouraging more women to come forward, Shabnam, but can I just talk to you about vetting? Because when someone puts their name forward to join any police service, they're vetted, aren't they, before they join? But the question is, what happens after that, during their time when they're in the police service? Is there continuous, it appears not, is there continuous assessment of their behaviour?
Well, there's a bit difference between assessment of their behaviour and vetting. They should be vetted every 5 or 10 years, certainly 5 years, I recall. And what would happen is that you'd go through a basic vetting process or a higher vetting level, which I went through in 2012 when I worked for the Olympics. And what would happen is police officers would be vetted. But the problem with vetting at the moment, and I know the Commissioner has said that there's some new processes in place which he's already started to implement. The problem with vetting is that it's a self-online form. So basically, if you say, I have not got any affiliation to neo-Nazis, I'm not racist, I don't engage in sexist, misogynistic, racist behaviour on Facebook, on Instagram, on any other social media site, and you tick that box, it's taken as read that that's the truth. And what will happen is that there's no further scrutiny on that. So the processes have to change. They've changed a lot since I joined. When I'd get police officers come to my house, all officers would have a visit. They'd have their neighbours scrutinised. They'd have the ins and outs of everything scrutinised. Now, part of it is to do with the resourcing issues, because they just don't have the capacity, they don't have resourcing, there's been huge cuts and so on. But in order to have an effective and a force that is with integrity and acts with integrity, you've got to make those vetting processes better.
But it is a balance, is it not, Harriet? Because if you go too deep into people's background, then you'll not get anybody wanting to come forward to be a police officer. So it's how you strike that balance and give trust back to the community and indeed to women and girls, most importantly, at this time.
Well, I mean, it's sort of pretty basic. I mean, if you look at the Carrick's case, he had already been reported for domestic abuse or sexual harassment, I think, before he even applied for the police. So, I mean, there are basic intelligence. I mean, you can't necessarily scrutinise every single aspect of an individual's life, but you can look on your intelligence systems, and we know that there are serving officers who have convictions as well, and we know, as with Carrick, that there are many officers who have repeat misconduct matters that where they've been reported complaints. Let alone obviously the far more serious where there's a criminal report. Why is that not an immediate flag for a proper investigation into an officer's conduct? And how could this officer remain in the police with so many different reports coming forward, that is, a no-brainer, quite frankly. That vetting and misconduct has to massively improve, and you need to start joining the dots. You need to see patterns of when somebody is reported on more than one occasion for a behaviour towards women, which is approaching, if not criminal. That is an indicator that they may be an abuser and a risk, and they should be properly looked at. And there should be no place in the police for officers like that.
Shabnam, finally, as I said, the Metropolitan Police Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, has said he's going to turn this around. He's going to try and win back the trust of women. I mean, if you were in that job now, you were a senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police, what would you be trying to do to help to achieve that?
Well, I think the fact is, one of the most important things is the changing of the culture of the organisation. The fact is, I've seen the 9 priorities, I've had a quick read through them. There isn't anything in there that's really jumping out of me that is so particularly new to policing. The biggest issue he has is leadership and changing the culture of the organisation. If he doesn't get the backup of his leaders who do not support whistleblowers, then he is never going to move forward.
Well, huge thank you to Shabnam Chowdhury and Harriet Wistich. Thank you so much for coming on to discuss what is a very difficult subject, and we'll see what happens next in relation to Sir Mark Rowley's plans. Well, significant disruption is expected on a day of mass strike action planned in February, with more walkouts from the NHS, workers, teachers and the RMT. Are the government and the strikers as far apart as ever? That's all after the break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Well, last week it was the nurses, this week ambulance workers. The continued walkout by NHS staff is clearly having an effect, and the boss of NHS England, Amanda Pritchard, says it's making workloads much more challenging. The 2 days of action this week meant nearly 28,000 NHS bookings had to be rescheduled, including 5,000 operations and treatments. Meanwhile, the RMT is also considering more strike dates. Teachers are set to walk out next month, and the NHS faces a huge crisis on February the 6th, when both nurses and ambulance workers strike. Alan Kearns was the Secretary of State for Wales until 2019, and I'm delighted to say he's joining me now. Alan, we're now in a situation where every week we just pick up the paper and say, right, what's not working? This week, something has to change, doesn't it?
Well, good afternoon, Arlene. It's good to talk to you after such a long time. So pleasure to be here. But you're absolutely right. Something has to change. But what frustrates me very often is the shouts that come from the opposition party in that they're calling for the government to act. But if you look quite closely, that the action that the UK government is taking is very similar to the action that the Welsh government is taking, for example. So when Keir Starmer makes criticisms or points out sort of elements of deficiencies, maybe to the negotiating strategy, maybe to the offers that have been made, Mark Drakeford is following exactly the same tactic. And therefore, there's a significant inconsistency in terms of the allegation that's coming from Sir Keir Starmer. And I just wish that wider journalists would recognise some of the issues that I'm trying to point out.
Yeah, so what you're essentially saying is if Labour was in power, they would have to do something as well in relation to the strikes. And it's interesting, isn't it, that it's not just the United Kingdom that's going to have a minimum service level bill, but that's the same in parts of Europe as well. Parts of Europe have this minimum service legislation in place, and they're often held up to be protectors of the rights of workers.
Well, I'm receiving lots of emails from constituents, many supporting the need for legislation, but some criticising the legislation, saying that this is an anti-union agenda. But in reality, it's not, because as you rightly point out, this is normal practice in so many parts of Europe. I think Germany is a particular leader in this area, who I would say that the opposition would claim would have fostered good working relationships because of European legislation with works councils and so on, but yet they still have this legislation. Because I think the public are starting to get fed up. I was out knocking doors yesterday. A nurse had been out on strike. I asked whether she planned to strike further, and she said, well, I'm not sure I can afford it. And she was trying to cost up the gain that a pay rise would give her against the money in which she was losing by not going into work. And I think that that's been the case for rail unions for an awful long time. There's a lot of drivers who've lost an awful lot of money. And I don't blame those individually, but I certainly blame the union leaders that have taken quite a militant approach when many of these people may well have received 100% salary during COVID lockdown, when others were at best at 80% salary.
Yeah. And we've been talking about the minimum service level bill, but are you up to date with what's happening in relation to any of the negotiations? And I've listed out a long list of different sectors that are having difficulties with pay. But do you think government are any closer to finding resolution in relation to these strikes, Alan?
Well, I just don't think it's the government. I think we need to respect the independent pay review body. I think that's the starting point. And the government have obviously been concerned that even if there is goodwill behind one particular sector or industry or profession, that if they break away from that then leaves them in a position that is vulnerable to strikes elsewhere. So I would hope that the independent pay review body could be accepted, or something very close to that. But then there would also be a commitment on the government that in the new round that comes forward in April, that takes account of maybe any potential backlog that has accumulated over recent years. But I would also then point out the point I'd highlighted earlier, that in the economic circumstances, that many will have received 100% pay, whereas others will have received reductions to 80%. So I think it's quite a complicated picture, and I would hope that we almost resolve these significant challenges over a two-tier negotiating, and that is, let's come to a settlement for this year based on the independent pay review body, but let's also ask the independent pay review body to take into account the challenges that have arisen because of the unique economic circumstances we've seen through the rise in energy costs, through inflation, through food prices, largely as a result of the conflict in Ukraine.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the independent pay review body, because I think a lot of people across the UK aren't aware that actually pay is set independently by this body. They take into consideration what's going on at the time. But that is broken down because the unions don't feel that that is enough for their members. When surely that was the whole point of us having an independent pay review body rather than politicians setting the pay, that it would be set independently.
Well, Arlene, you're absolutely right. So the independent pay review body is quite obvious, takes into account representation from the unions, from the government, but also from independent sectors and what is the market and what is a fair level of pay compared to similar jobs. But I also remember when I was Secretary of State, we were negotiating a new Government of Wales bill to strengthen what was the end of the Assembly to creating it a Parliament. And there was a specific request to have power over the negotiations of teachers' pay. So basically that would be wholly devolved in the Welsh Government. But that hasn't stopped teachers voting to strike in Wales. Now, the Welsh Government have the power outside of the independent pay review body, the UK structure, to negotiate directly with the teaching unions in Wales. So that's the Labour Party has a power to negotiate directly with teachers, teaching unions. But the reality is that they're frightened to do that, because they know the moment that they show a further financial support or change of terms and conditions to one organisation, one profession, it then means that the precedent has been set that could continue for others. So there are freedoms that are there, but they're not being used, and so it's almost as though people are when they're being critical politically, they're then hiding behind the independent pay review body, but close scrutiny will show that they have got the freedom to do what they want if they wanted to do something differently. But they not. They don't. They prefer to hide behind the independent pay review body, and I would also then say hide behind the UK government, and in the hope that no one notices or scrutinises the freedom that the Labour governments have in terms of coming to some sort of independent settlement.
I do think it's important, Alan, that people understand it's not as straightforward as they may think, you know, just a negotiation between government and the particular union. There's a lot of different parts, moving parts, that perhaps people don't see when they're looking at what's going on. So I think it's important that they understand around the independent pay review body, for example. But it's really good to see you again, Alan. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon. So thanks to Alan Kearns there. Up next, the efforts to keep one of the last surviving works of a great Renaissance artist in the UK have paid off. The Ulster Museum in Belfast will take custody of the painting later this year. What does it mean to have such a great work of art in Northern Ireland? But that's after the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Hello there, it's just before 12:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. A manhunt is underway in California after at least 10 people have been killed in a shooting during Chinese New Year celebrations. A warning, the following will contain some flashing images. Emergency services have been responding to the incident in Monterey Park near Los Angeles, where thousands of people had gathered for the celebrations. A further 10 people have been taken to hospital to be treated for a range of injuries, at least one of whom is in a critical condition. Police have confirmed the suspect is male and is on the run, and more details on this one as and when we get them. Labour's reported Boris Johnson to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards over allegations the chairman of the BBC helped the former Prime Minister arrange a loan weeks before he was recommended for the job by Mr Johnson. The calls come as the former Prime Minister visited Ukraine this morning as part of the country's Unity Day, and it follows a report in the Sunday Times that claims Tory donor Richard Sharp was involved in talks about financing Mr Johnson when he found himself in financial difficulties in late 2020. Now, a spokesperson for the former Prime Minister has dismissed the report as rubbish. Richard Sharp insists there was no conflict of interest. Labour and the SNP, though, have called for an independent inquiry. Meanwhile, a cabinet minister has told GB News Nadeem Zahawi has the Prime Minister's support following allegations about his tax affairs. The embattled Tory party chairman's under increasing political pressure after revealing he made a careless but not deliberate error over a multi-million-pound share sale in the polling company he founded. The former Chancellor did not disclose the size of the settlement with HMRC or confirm if he paid a fine. Labour's call his position untenable. Foreign Secretary, though, James Cleverly, says he believes Mr Zahawi has paid his taxes.
I don't know any more details than what he has already put in the public domain. I don't think it would be right or proper for me to speculate or guess about any further details about his tax affairs. But he has been a successful entrepreneur, building a company which has paid tax, employing people who have paid taxes, and he has himself paid tax, a considerable amount, because he's been successful.
And US investigators have found more classified documents during a 12-hour search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some of them were from when Biden was a senator, others from when he served as vice president under Barack Obama. A special counsel has been appointed to investigate how the president has handled sensitive documents. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now, it's back to Arlene.
Thanks so much, Aaron, for that news update. Well, in art history, the High Renaissance is known as the period that produced some of the most exceptional works of art and architecture in Italy. The likes of Da Vinci, Raphael and Bramante contributed to the extraordinary period that was highly influential on European art. Baldassare Peruzzi, I hope I've pronounced that right, was also one such artist, and in an effort to keep one of his few surviving paintings in the country, the UK government imposed an export ban to give time for a UK buyer to come forward and save the artwork from being sold overseas. Successful fundraising means the rare painting has been acquired by none other than the National Museum of Northern Ireland, and it will go on display at the Ulster Museum later this year. It will be the only Renaissance painting on display in Northern Ireland, so it's hugely exciting. Joining me now is William Blair, Director of Collections at the National Museums of Northern Ireland. William, welcome to the show. This is quite a coup for National Museums Northern Ireland. You must be very excited about it.
Well, good afternoon, Arlene. It's nice to see you. Yes, we're absolutely thrilled, as you might imagine. You know, this is such an important painting. It's really one of a kind in many respects, and it's such an important addition to our national collection. As you say, we don't have a painting from the sort of the Renaissance in the Ulster Museum's collection, so it addresses an important gap, and I think it's something that will really resonate with our audiences. In many ways, it's a revolutionary painting in terms of breaking new ground in art. You know, that's what's associated with the High Renaissance. It was such a formative period in terms of Western art, but it's also a scene of the Nativity, so it has that broad appeal as well. So we're absolutely delighted.
And I'm delighted we're looking at it now, actually, because it is the Nativity scene. And William, for people who don't know a lot about art, or indeed Renaissance art for that matter, will find it quite accessible because it is such a well-known scene, won't they?
Well, absolutely. I think it's a subject really that has that powerful resonance to many people, but it's also a painting that has many features that actually kind of located within that ferment, that exceptionally creative period of the High Renaissance, when the rules of Western art were simultaneously being formulated and at the same time were being challenged by artists like Peruzzi. So it's something that I think will really resonate with our audiences, and we feel it's really important as a matter of principle that people in Northern Ireland have the opportunity to see great art, you know, that you don't have to get on a plane to go to London or to Edinburgh, that you're able to access art of this quality in Belfast. So, you know, as I say, we're delighted.
And is there a strong audience, do you think, in Northern Ireland and indeed wider afield? It would be great to see people travelling to actually see this work of art. Do you think there's an audience there, William, for, you obviously do, and that's why you bid for this wonderful piece of work?
Well, we do, and I think it's an important challenge for all museums, and how you connect with audiences and how you build your audience, how you diversify your audience. We collect both historic paintings and contemporary art at the Ulster Museum, and you know, we know that for example, whenever we were able to borrow a Rembrandt self-portrait a few years ago from the National Gallery, which was on tour, 28,000 people came to see that painting over 8 weeks, and half of them had never been to the Ulster Museum before. So we know that actually there's an audience there. And part of the challenge for us is just ensuring that we can help people to connect to our collection and really understand it, and to make art accessible for everyone.
So when this export ban was put on this painting in order to keep it in the UK, tell us about the process within the National Museum as to why you decided you were going to go for it and fundraise and actually bring it to Belfast.
Well, our work is guided by our collection development policy. So, within that, we have a collection that spans really, from the 15th century to the present day, and we have particular strengths within the collection. As you might imagine, Irish and British art is a particular strength, but we also collect more widely across international art, European art, so that we can actually tell the story of art in a very broad sense and allow people to explore the ideas and the kind of the influences and how art movements develop over time. So in that sense, when we were approached about this opportunity, we knew that this was a gap. We knew this was something that would really add quality and depth to our collection. And I must take the opportunity just to thank our partners in this endeavour, because it wouldn't have been possible without a major fundraising effort. The National Lottery Heritage Fund, the Esme Mitchell Trust, the Art Fund. The National Gallery has made an important contribution because it's undergoing conservation work currently at the National Gallery. DCMS have been very supportive. Our own Department for Communities have given us generous support. So it's been a collective effort to make this happen, and I think that's all very positive to see so many organisations come together in order to kind of save this for the nation.
Yeah, it's always a cocktail of funding, isn't it, William, when you go to do anything of this nature? But tell us a little bit about this, the man behind the painting, Peruzzi. Did he paint a lot of pictures? Was he more into architectural work? What is the history behind this fascinating man?
Well, what makes this very unique in many respects is that much of his work has been lost. He painted frescoes mostly on buildings, and so they have been lost over time, unfortunately, and there are very few of his paintings that actually survive, and this is one of them. And he was a contemporary of Michelangelo and Raphael and all these artists that are so kind of formative and important in terms of the development of Western art. So that's what makes it really special to have this as a survivor, really in many ways quite a unique survivor. And it'll certainly be one of a kind in Northern Ireland. But it's just such an important period. The early 1500s, was such a kind of a intensely creative period, and really kind of much of our understanding of Western art and the Renaissance itself, was so fundamental to, the development of science and ideas and our intellectual development, across Europe.
And history of art is studied widely in our schools and indeed universities in Northern Ireland. Do you hope, William, finally, that this will inspire our students now that they don't have to, as you say rightly, get on a plane and go to see a work of art of this significance, but they can come to Belfast, to the Ulster Museum, and see it there for themselves and take it into their consciousness and hopefully, as I say, inspire them to do more?
Well, absolutely. Art museums, and we are an art museum, is an incredibly rich environment for learning. Art offers a whole window on the world. It offers a window on our internal world, ideas and emotions, and all of the things that kind of help us to be, to be more critical in our thinking and understand the world around us. We have very strong partnerships with our local universities, in particular Queen's and Ulster University. We also have a partnership. There's already interest, for example, we have a collaboration with the Robinson Library in Armagh, which is kind of opening up another, they're looking at their collection, and the Peruzzi very much kind of connects with some of the material in their collection. So there's lots of opportunities. And, we have a very dynamic schools programme. We are a national education resource for Northern Ireland, and it's our collection really kind of makes that a unique, learning asset. So the Peruzzi is a wonderful addition. And it's also, as you know, the Ulster Museum's free. So it's accessible to all, and everyone can come and see it. And we'll be delighted to welcome everyone kind of when it goes on display in the spring. And I hope you have an opportunity to come and see it yourself, Arlene. I'll give you the grand tour.
Well, I've had many a grand tour around the Ulster Museum, but thank you for the invitation, William, and huge congratulations to you and to everyone in the museum for being able to bring this to Northern Ireland and inspire future generations. Thank you. Thank you to William Blair. He's the Director of Collections at National Museums, Northern Ireland. Well, coming up, haggis, neeps and tatties. What more could you possibly need to celebrate Burns Night? Maybe a little bit of poetry, perhaps. Michael Portillo examines the Scottish tradition after the break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Welcome back to the final segment of the show. Well, the Scottish poet Robbie Burns was born over 260 years ago on the 25th of January. Every year, Scots all over the world celebrate his birthday with a traditional Burns night supper of haggis, neeps and tatties, all washed down with plenty of whiskey. The haggis is traditionally brought in by a piper, and Burns' famous poem addressed to a haggis is recited over the dish, after which the haggis is ceremoniously sliced in two. Never one to miss out on a good supper or indeed a celebration, Michael Portillo went along to the Boisdale Scottish restaurant in London to meet Ranald MacDonald and discover the stories behind Burns Night.
Ranald, it's lovely to be here this evening. And you are Ranald MacDonald. Does that make you a MacDonald, as in that's your clan?
The longest version of my name is Ranald MacDonald Younger of Clan Ranald. Mac, as you know, means son of. Clan means children. So I'm Ranald, son of Donald, of the children of Ranald. And we began a small dynasty in the 12th century, having picked up the pieces from the Viking invasions of the late 8th century, and formed a sea kingdom under Somerled, King of the Isles. And all MacDonalds, of whom there are around 6 million in the world, descend from this territory which came down from Ross down to Argyll and included all the Hebrides. in the west coast of Scotland.
What does Burns night mean to you? I mean, Burns is quite a recent chap by comparison with your family history, but do you rate Burns, Rabbie Burns?
Burns is incredibly important, and he helped unify a Scottish consciousness, but it's slightly counterintuitive how that all came about. Now, Burns's father was a Jacobite soldier. Burns himself was pro the French Revolution, anti-monarchy, and has really become a symbol of Republican sympathies. But he had a sort of a lean towards the Jacobites.
And the Jacobites, just to keep people up to date, these were supporters of the Stuart dynasty, who believed that the Stuarts should be on the English and Scottish thrones at a time when actually the Hanoverians were.
James VI of Scotland and I of England inherited England. So the Scots really inherited England, but the Stuarts wouldn't renounce their Roman Catholicism. So the throne went to George I.
What do you describe the language in which Rabbie Burns writes? Do you call that Scots?
Well, Scots was a lowland dialect with its own manner of speech and vocabulary, which was unique to lowland Scotland and spread throughout, whereas we're from, and Robbie had a sort of affiliation to the Highlands, but we're from the Highlands where we spoke Gaelic.
And Gaelic is a language that I, as an English speaker, would have no chance of understanding.
None at all.
Scots, I would follow probably 60% of Scots.
Gaelic is unrecognisable in any form at all. It's a completely separate language.
How do you normally celebrate Burns Night?
Very rarely do we have two people celebrating Burns Night. So it's the opposite of Valentine's Night. It's normally a group of friends celebrating their love of each other and life. And it's normally a 4-course dinner with haggis as second course and maybe some venison or beef, and then maybe a lovely pudding like a cranachan, then followed by a selection of Scottish cheeses. There's a sort of an etiquette of speeches that runs throughout the dinner with piping at interludes.
Well, in our pared back Burns Night, where you and I are alone, shall we cut to the chase? Shall we cut to the haggis?
Well, let us call the haggis in.
Before you're on the stodgy face, great chieftain on a pun race, up in the bow you take your place, big stripe Portillo, and will, and you will your grace, as long as we earn. The groaning trencher there you fill, your herd is like a dusty hill, your pen would help them in the mill, in time of need, and through your pores the Jews distill, like amber bead, his knife, say rustic labour dicht, and cut you up your ready slicht, pledging your gushing entrails brecht, like Orry ditch, and then oh, and then you drink your toast now, Michael, pick up your whiskey, and it's Slangevar, Slangevar!
Slangevar! Now, the haggis has been piped and addressed. Are we getting near the stage where we can eat it?
I think we're within seconds. The big question you should ask yourself is whether or not you wish to combine this Aberfeldy 12-year-old, which is a lovely, lovely malt, with your haggis, either by tasting with the haggis or by pouring it on. A lot of people, 66.7% of our haggis diners, pour that whiskey on the haggis. So what I suggest you do, Michael, is cut open your haggis, pour a little bit of tiny amount of whiskey on one little portion of that haggis, and raise that to your mouth. Enjoy it, or taste it, and if you enjoy it, slosh the rest on.
That is delicious. No doubt that whiskey and haggis go together, whether you mix them on the plate or in the mouth. Beautiful combination. We better tell some people what haggis is. What's in there?
Well, haggis is really an unevolved medieval sausage. And I think throughout Europe, even many parts of Africa and other parts of the world, whatever nutrition was locally available, whether it's just blood from an animal or whatever parts of the animal remained would be combined with local cereals, what spices were available, and tied up in a pudding, because people didn't, in the old days, they didn't have sort of frying pans and smart kitchens. They just had a fire and a cauldron. So it'd be tied in the stomach of an animal and then boiled. And because of the sheep lung, haggis is banned in the USA. And we've been campaigning for many a year to have the Americans lift their ban, which I think had the 28% of the Americans who have Scottish descent, I don't know how many generations to go back for that, but there's a big chunk of America has Scottish descent. And we're denying them their birthright on a silly little quibble.
No, that's an important battle to fight. Where are my bash neeps?
Your bash neeps are is the orange on the right.
And that means that they're parsnips, does it?
Really, they're Swedish turnips, and the English call them Swedes, and the Scots call them neeps, and they were really introduced as a fodder crop in the 18th century. The potato was also introduced in the 18th century, and most of the spices in this haggis are really 19th century, because pepper, nutmeg, and all these other spices weren't widely available in poorer households going back in time.
The Scottish people have Burns Night, they have St Andrew's Night, and they have New Year and Hogmanay. Which of these festivals is the most important?
I think the most important for Scottish consciousness, definitely not the Greek saint. I think it's Burns Night. I mean, he's managed to get his tentacles into everything that was Scotland. And it's all sort of there, from whiskey to haggis to the Highlands, to the dialect of being a smart thinker. He was like the punk rock and Elvis and the Beatles in one. He was revolutionary. He had a sweet, sweet voice that comes through his poetry, but he's also he's a great intellect, a great thinker, a forward thinker, sort of a humanitarian. So he was a pop star, and he just pulls together everything with Scotland. And I think he's a great symbol of everything that's Scottish. And there are more statues to Burns than to anyone other than Queen Victoria and various deity in the world.
I wonder if I might propose a toast to the Clan MacDonald and, of course, the immortal name of Robbie Burns.
So MacDonald's and Robbie Burns, Saint Gervais. And don't forget the MacDonald on your tie.
Michael seemed to be enjoying that a great deal. And, of course, Burns Night will be celebrated this Wednesday in Scotland, but very much in Northern Ireland as well. There's a lot of Ulster Scots there, and they'll be celebrating. And actually, the Linen Hall and Library in Belfast has the largest... he's laughing at me, Alistair, but it does. It has the largest collection of poetry of Robbie Burns, so don't forget.
I know, it was the Catch Your Haggis.
Catch the Haggis.
Hunting, we timorous beasties and all of that stuff.
So, Alistair, what's coming up on the show?
Well, on the public sector strikes, commuters like me have all but given up that the train can take the strain. It's becoming a nightmare. There's more of that coming back. But, of course, teachers are next up.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem, not only for the wee ones, but also for an awful lot of mums and dads like us, who they don't treat schools as kind of childcare, but you can go to work because you know the child is safely at school being taught. We'll be discussing that because it is going to be a real problem. Plus, carrying on your conversation about Linda Ardern and when politicians should call it a day, having run out of gas, as opposed to being defenestrated.
Yeah. Exactly. I look forward to that. Well, thanks to all my guests this week. Michael, as I said, will be back next Sunday when he'll be discussing English whiskey and spies. Goodbye, and I'll see you soon.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest weather update courtesy of the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vautry. We've got a fairly foggy start for some of us out there today. There is freezing fog around across southeastern areas of England underneath this high pressure system, but further towards the north